welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. This is a review of Riddick, the third part in the Richard Riddick franchise. So, the first film, which was Pitch Black, was a somewhat flawed but rather fun sci-fi action thriller adventure that borrowed from a number of films, most notably from Aliens. The second was The Chronicles of Riddick, which was a huge budgeted action thriller with our anti-hero escaping from a hellish prison planet and going to battle with the suitably silly baddies, the Necromongers. The trouble was with that film is that it didn't have a light touch, so it ended up not a bad film, but rather dour and plodding and joyless, with the political machinations of the film being at odds with the fun stuff, with the threatening to kill a man with a teacup. There just wasn't enough of that to raise it up. So with this, the third film, Riddick, what they've done is basically press the reset button. They can't get rid of the Necromongers fast enough at the beginning of this film, so they come up with a reason just to drop them entirely, and then for the duration of the film we're just done without them, and I think it's absolutely the right call to make. So we kick off. Riddick is, spoiler alert, Riddick becomes the sort of king of the Necromongers because of their saying you keep what you kill. So he kills the boss, ergo he is the new boss. The scheming Carl Urban character Varco is back, and at the beginning of Riddick he promises to take Riddick to Furya, I think it's called, the homeworld of his, Furian race. But we can see the inevitable betrayal a mile off, and it's a wonder that Riddick doesn't spot it. But ultimately Riddick is abandoned on a planet devoid of life other than the stuff that's trying to eat Riddick, and that kicks off the third film. So we're on this incredibly desolate planet. Eventually Riddick happens upon a nearby empty mercenary base camp thing. He makes his presence known, which very quickly triggers two different and very different teams of mercenaries to come down in their spaceships and form an uneasy alliance in an attempt to capture Riddick. It's a very similar plot really to Pitch Black, with a disparate group of individuals on a hostile planet trying to survive and get off that planet. In terms of the three films, actually, the trilogy, it reminds me somewhat of the Evil Dead films, because we almost have the first film, fairly low budget, actiony sort of style film, which is somewhat successful, both Pitch Black and Evil Dead. In both trilogies, well, they're both trilogies at the moment, we then get a remake of the first film, or as near as damn it a remake of the first film, very similar one, and then we get a sort of wild card where they get a bit more of a budget and they go and make a flawed but at the same time fun action, sort of big set piece battle action film, which turned out to be something of a noble failure. So what's to say about Riddick? Well, firstly, it's the prime example for me now of not judging a film before you see it and being fair, because I was expecting this film to be a real clanger of a film, and I really enjoyed it. Vin Diesel, who I think is an inexplicable Burke in the Fast and Furious films, is really strong here, and it's not that easy to play the role of Riddick. Back in the 1980s, it was very simple to be an action hero. You needed muscles and a stupid accent, and those were the two things. Today it doesn't work like that. Very, very difficult to be an action hero or a successful action hero in the modern day, and there's something very compelling and very interesting in his performance. And the opening 30 minutes are pretty much just Riddick on his own in this film, and they are the strongest 30 minutes in the entire film. It's Riddick and some CGI creatures at various points, but it's really, really good, and it all comes down to Vin Diesel's excellent performance. I was completely absorbed by the opening 30 minutes. I thought the opening act was absolutely fantastic, and I really wasn't expecting it. Once the mercs arrive, the film becomes a bit more conventional, but on the plus side, they bring some likeable actors there. There's some levity there, a bit of banter, a bit of fun, a lot of gallows humour as well, which is very welcome. One of the merc leaders is also quite silly and campy, but that acts as a real palliative to the darker stuff that's going on there as well, and the threat level, and for me it worked really well. Towards the end of the film, it does rather become somewhat predictable, and it does descend into a prolonged action scene for the last 30 minutes or so, and they just chuck everything in there for good measure, just ramp everything up to 11. Perhaps a more confident director than Tui would have kept the discipline a little bit more there, but it's difficult to be too critical of him because he's done a really good job up until then. Having said all that, the film's really good. As I said, Tui's shot this really well. It looks great, especially the opening act, as I've discussed. Some of the CGI doesn't look fantastic, but ultimately I was so impressed with everything else that was going on, it really didn't bother me at all, and a lot of it is perfectly passable. So it is a fun action film. It's a bit more than that, and it's a great example of why I need to be completely fair and completely impartial going into films, because things can surprise me in a good way as well as a bad way, and it's lovely to be reminded of that. So Riddick, very much recommended. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.